Picture this. It's March 15th, 1941, and you're Captain Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann, one of Germany's most feared U-boat aces. You've sent 17 Allied ships to the bottom of the Atlantic, and your crew worships you like a god of war. Your submarine, U-557, cuts through the frigid waters west of Ireland. Hunting for the British convoy, your intelligence reports should be passing through this exact area at dawn. You raise your periscope as the first light breaks the horizon. Your trained eyes scan methodically from left to right, searching for the telltale silhouettes of merchant ships and their escorts. Then you see it, or rather you don't see it. There's something wrong with this picture. Your intelligence is perfect. The convoy should be right there, but all you see is empty ocean and a strangely colored smudge on the horizon that looks like... No, that's impossible. You blink hard, rub your eyes and look again. That smudge is moving, and it's pink. Bright, unmistakable flamingo pink. A massive Royal Navy destroyer, bristling with guns, painted the color of a child's nursery. Your first thought isn't tactical, it's medical. Have you finally cracked under the pressure? Are you hallucinating? But what if I told you that this ridiculous pink paint job was actually one of the most ingenious military innovations of World War II? What if this seemingly insane decision saved thousands of Allied lives, sank dozens of U-boats, and helped turn the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic? What if the color you associate with little girls' bedrooms became one of the deadliest weapons in naval warfare? Before we dive into this absolutely mind-blowing story, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where in the world you're watching from. Are you in London, where this story began? Maybe Sao Paulo, where naval history enthusiasts are discovering these incredible tales? Or perhaps you're watching from somewhere completely unexpected. I love seeing our global community of history lovers come together, and your comments always make my day. Now, let's uncover the truth behind one of warfare's most unexpected and brilliant secrets. The story you think you know about naval camouflage is not just incomplete, it's been deliberately hidden from you. Today, we're going to completely shatter the myth that military innovation always looks serious, intimidating, and traditionally masculine. We'll reveal how a color associated with nurseries, flamingos, and cotton candy became a weapon of war so effective that it literally made enemy submarines question their own sanity. We'll explore the brilliant mind behind this innovation, the fierce resistance he faced from his own navy, the scientific principles that made it work, and the devastating impact it had on German U-boat operations. By the end of this video, you'll understand how sometimes the most effective solutions are the ones that seem completely insane, and why the most dangerous enemy in warfare isn't bullets or torpedoes, but your own assumptions about what's possible. To understand why the Royal Navy started painting their ships pink, we need to transport ourselves back to 1939, when Britain was facing what Winston Churchill would later call its darkest hour. But this wasn't just political rhetoric, it was a mathematical reality written in blood and steel across the Atlantic Ocean. The German U-boat campaign wasn't just sinking ships, it was systematically strangling the British Isles. Every single day, merchant vessels carrying vital supplies, food, fuel, ammunition, raw materials, were being hunted down and torpedoed by German submarines. The statistics were absolutely terrifying. In 1940 alone, U-boats sent over 1,000 Allied ships to the bottom of the ocean. That's nearly 3 ships every single day, vanishing beneath the waves along with their crews and cargo. But the numbers only tell part of the story. Each sinking represented a catastrophic loss that rippled through the entire British war effort. When a tanker carrying aviation fuel was torpedoed, RAF pilots couldn't fly missions. When a cargo ship loaded with steel was sunk, tank production stopped. When a grain ship went down, civilians faced starvation. Britain was an island nation completely dependent on maritime supply lines, and those lifelines were being severed one by one. The traditional approach to naval camouflage was proving utterly inadequate. Ships painted in standard grey or blue were still being spotted and destroyed with devastating efficiency. British naval commanders were watching their fleet disappear and were desperate for any solution, any innovation, no matter how unconventional, that could give their vessels even the slightest advantage in this deadly game of maritime hide and seek. The pressure was immense. Every failed convoy meant more British civilians would go hungry. Every sunk destroyer meant fewer escorts for future missions. Every lost cruiser represented years of construction time and millions of pounds that Britain couldn't afford to lose. The Royal Navy, once the undisputed master of the seas, was being systematically destroyed by an enemy they could barely see coming. Into this desperate situation stepped a man who would change naval warfare forever, though nobody, including himself, realized it at the time. Lord Louis Mountbatten was a fascinating contradiction. A member of the royal family, who was also a hands-on naval officer, a traditionalist who was obsessed with innovation, and a man whose unconventional thinking would either save the Royal Navy or destroy his own career. In 1940, Mountbatten was captain of HMS Kelly, a destroyer that had already survived multiple German attacks through a combination of luck, skill, and what his crew called Mountbatten magic. But Mountbatten knew that luck wouldn't last forever. He was watching ships around him disappear with terrifying regularity, and he was determined to find a scientific solution to what everyone else saw as simply the brutal reality of war. Mountbatten was different from most naval officers of his generation. While his colleagues relied on tradition and experience, he was fascinated by emerging technologies and scientific principles. He spent his off-duty hours reading research papers on optics, studying reports on aviation camouflage, and conducting his own experiments with light and color. His fellow officers thought he was eccentric at best, possibly unhinged at worst. Here's where everything you think you know about military logic gets completely turned upside down. In late 1940, Mountbatten didn't propose better armor, faster engines, more powerful weapons, or improved radar systems. Instead, he walked into a meeting with the Admiralty's most senior officers and suggested they paint their warships bright pink. The reaction was exactly what you'd expect from a room full of career naval officers who had spent decades studying warfare and strategy. Dead silence, then nervous laughter, then genuine concern for Mountbatten's mental health. Pink on warships. In the middle of the most brutal naval conflict in human history, had the stress of command finally broken one of their most promising young officers? Rear Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, who would later become one of Britain's most celebrated naval commanders, reportedly stared at Mountbatten for a full 30 seconds before asking, "Captain, are you feeling quite well?" Other officers began whispering among themselves. Some suggested that Mountbatten should be relieved of command and sent for medical evaluation. But Mountbatten wasn't joking, and he definitely wasn't crazy. He had discovered something that would revolutionize naval warfare, something so counterintuitive that it took genuine scientific genius to recognize it. He had identified a fundamental flaw in how everyone thought about camouflage, and he had developed a solution that was so unexpected, so seemingly absurd, that it would give the Royal Navy an almost supernatural advantage over their enemies. To understand Mountbatten's breakthrough, you need to understand that the real enemy wasn't just the U-boats, it was light itself, and how human vision processes that light under specific conditions. Naval camouflage had always focused on blending with the ocean, but that was thinking in only 2 dimensions. The real battle was happening in 3 dimensions, and the 3rd dimension was time. Traditional naval thinking assumed that camouflage meant making ships harder to see against the blue-gray ocean. But Mountbatten realized that German U-boat commanders weren't just looking for ships against the ocean. They were hunting during specific times of day, when visibility conditions gave them maximum advantage. Dawn and dusk, those magical hours when the light plays tricks on human eyes, were when most successful attacks occurred. U-boat tactics were built around these golden hours. Submarines would position themselves along known shipping routes and wait for the perfect lighting conditions. As the sun rose or set, the contrast between ships and sky would become most pronounced, making targets easy to spot from the low angle of a submarine periscope. This wasn't accident, it was carefully calculated strategy based on years of experience and training. Mountbatten had stumbled upon a phenomenon that wouldn't be fully understood by optical science for decades: the way human vision processes color in low-light conditions, particularly during the specific atmospheric conditions present at dawn and dusk. During these times, When the sky takes on those soft pinkish hues created by light scattering through atmospheric particles, a pink-painted ship doesn't stand out against the horizon. It literally disappears into it. But here's the truly brilliant part. This optical illusion only worked from the specific angle that mattered most: the low-angle view from a submarine periscope. From above, from aircraft, pink ships were still clearly visible. From other surface vessels, they stood out dramatically. But U-boats attacked from sea level, and from that crucial perspective, pink ships became ghosts. The science behind this is fascinating. When light passes through the atmosphere at dawn and dusk, it gets scattered by particles in the air. Shorter wavelengths, blues and violets, scatter more than longer wavelengths, reds and pinks. This is why sunsets appear red and pink. The blue light has been scattered away, leaving the warmer colors to reach our eyes. A ship painted in carefully calibrated pink tones would blend perfectly with this scattered light, becoming effectively invisible to observers at sea level. Mountbatten had also discovered something else crucial. Human eyes are terrible at distinguishing between similar colors when they're viewed against a bright background. A pink ship silhouetted against a pink dawn sky doesn't register as a separate object to the human brain. It gets processed as part of the background. This wasn't just camouflage. It was a form of optical warfare that exploited fundamental limitations in human perception. The Admiralty's resistance to Mountbatten's proposal wasn't just about military tradition. It was about everything the Royal Navy represented. For centuries, British naval power had been projected through intimidation and overwhelming presence. Their ships were painted in colors that announced British naval supremacy to the world, imposing grays, deep blues, colors that said, "We are here, we are strong, and we are not hiding from anyone." The Royal Navy's identity was built on the concept of ruling the waves, not hiding from the enemy. British naval doctrine emphasized aggressive action, superior firepower, and the psychological impact of an imposing fleet. Pink suggested the complete opposite. Pink was undignified. Pink was what you painted a little girl's bedroom, not a destroyer that carried the hopes and fears of the British Empire. Senior officers worried about much more than just effectiveness. They were concerned about morale, both among their own crews and in the broader public. How could sailors take pride in serving aboard what enemy propaganda would inevitably call toy boats or floating nurseries? How could they maintain their fighting spirit when German radio broadcasts mocked them for sailing in ships painted like birthday cakes? There were also practical concerns that went beyond psychology. What would happen when these pink ships returned to port? How would they be received by dockworkers, civilians, and Allied naval officers? Would the sight of pink warships undermine confidence in British naval power? Would it suggest that Britain was so desperate that they were resorting to absurd gimmicks? Admiral Sir Dudley Pound, the first Sea Lord, reportedly told his staff that he would rather lose ships painted in proper naval colors than win battles with vessels that looked like floating advertisements for a cosmetics company. The resistance wasn't just professional, it was deeply personal and cultural. But Mountbatten was nothing if not persistent, and the war situation was becoming desperate enough that the Admiralty finally agreed to a limited test. In early 1941, HMS Penelope, a Arethusa-class light cruiser, became the guinea pig for what would officially be called Experimental Camouflage Scheme No. 4, but would forever be known as Mountbatten Pink. The color wasn't just any pink. It was a carefully calculated shade developed through extensive testing and scientific analysis. Mountbatten worked with optical specialists and paint chemists to create what he called the perfect pink, a pale rose color that exactly matched the dawn and dusk sky under typical North Atlantic weather conditions. The formula was so precise that it had to be mixed in specific ratios and applied under controlled conditions to achieve the exact optical properties required. HMS Penelope's crew was, to put it mildly, mortified. These were hardened naval veterans who had survived multiple combat engagements, and now they were sailing into battle in what looked like a giant pink toy. The ship's nickname quickly became HMS Pink Lady, though the crew used considerably more colorful language when describing their vessel in private. But something remarkable happened almost immediately. HMS Penelope began operating in waters where other ships had been regularly spotted and attacked by German submarines. Week after week, she carried out her missions, escorting convoys, patrolling shipping lanes, hunting for U-boats, without being detected. German intelligence reports indicated heavy U-boat activity in her operational areas, but somehow, impossibly, she remained invisible. The results weren't just good, they were almost unbelievable. In her first 3 months of operation with the pink camouflage, HMS Penelope completed 17 missions in areas where other ships had been attacked. She escorted 6 convoys through waters where previous escorts had been sunk. She conducted reconnaissance operations in German-controlled areas without being spotted. Most remarkably, she engaged and sank 2 German submarines that never saw her coming until it was too late. U-boat commanders operating in Penelope's area began reporting strange phenomena. Ships that German intelligence confirmed should be in their hunting zones simply weren't visible. Convoys that should have been easy targets seemed to be traveling without escorts, only for those missing escorts to suddenly appear and attack from impossible angles. Some U-boat captains began to doubt their own abilities and requested transfers to different operational areas. The German Navy's intelligence reports from this period make fascinating reading. They speak of British ships that seem to materialize out of thin air and vanish like ghosts. Some reports suggested that the British had developed some kind of new radar jamming technology that made their ships invisible to German detection equipment. The truth, that their enemies had simply changed the color of their paint, never occurred to them. Now let's shift perspective completely and see this through German eyes. Imagine you're Kapitänleutnant Heinrich Müller, commanding U-124 in the North Atlantic. You're not just any U-boat commander. You're one of Germany's most successful submarine aces, with 23 confirmed kills and a reputation for being able to spot enemy ships from impossible distances. Your success rate has been phenomenal because you've developed an almost supernatural ability to read the ocean and sky. You know exactly what to look for. The distinctive silhouette of a destroyer against the morning sky, the telltale smoke trail of a merchant vessel, the subtle wake patterns that indicate a convoy changing course. Your eyes are trained instruments of war, calibrated through hundreds of successful hunts. You've been operating in the same area for weeks, and your intelligence reports are crystal clear. British convoys are passing through this zone every 3 to 4 days. Your previous hunts here have been incredibly successful. You've sunk 4 merchant ships and damaged a destroyer in the past month alone. You know these waters like your own backyard. But suddenly, inexplicably, something changes. Ships that your intelligence reports say should be in your hunting area simply aren't there. You scan the horizon methodically, the way you've done thousands of times before, using the same techniques that have made you one of Germany's most feared submarine commanders. But you see nothing. Empty ocean, clear skies, no targets. What you don't realize, what you can't possibly realize, is that you're looking directly at them. That pale smudge on the horizon that your brain automatically dismisses as a low cloud or a trick of the light. That's HMS Penelope, painted in Mountbatten pink, invisible in plain sight. Your eyes are seeing her, but your brain isn't processing her as a threat because she doesn't match any of the visual patterns you've been trained to recognize. Word of Penelope's unprecedented success spread quickly through the Royal Navy's command structure, though it was classified at the highest levels of secrecy. Ship after ship was quietly brought into dry dock and repainted in the new camouflage scheme. Destroyers, cruisers, frigates, and eventually even some battleships received the pink treatment. The program expanded rapidly beyond just Mountbatten pink. Naval researchers developed an entire palette of colors designed for different lighting conditions, operational areas, and seasonal variations. The logistics of this transformation were staggering. Painting a warship isn't like painting a house. It requires specialized marine paints that can withstand saltwater, extreme weather, and combat damage. The pink paint had to be formulated to maintain its exact color properties under all conditions while still providing the protective qualities needed for naval operations. Entire paint factories were converted to produce these specialized camouflage colors. But the Germans never caught on. Their intelligence networks, which were generally excellent at detecting British naval innovations, completely missed this development. German agents reported seeing fewer British ships in traditional hunting areas, but they attributed this to changes in convoy routes or improved British intelligence, not to a revolutionary camouflage system that was hiding ships in plain sight. The psychological impact on German submarine crews became increasingly severe. When you can't see your enemy but they can clearly see and attack you, warfare becomes a nightmare of paranoia and uncertainty. U-boat commanders who had been confident and aggressive began to second-guess themselves. Some requested medical evaluations, convinced that their eyesight was failing. Others became overly cautious, reducing their effectiveness and allowing more Allied ships to reach their destinations safely. The tactical advantages of pink camouflage went far beyond simply avoiding detection. Pink-painted ships could approach German positions completely undetected, launching surprise attacks that devastated enemy formations. Convoy escorts painted in Mountbatten pink could position themselves between U-boats and merchant ships without being spotted, creating an invisible shield around vital supply convoys. The element of surprise became so complete that some German submarines were sunk without ever realizing they were under attack. U-boat crews would surface for routine maintenance or to charge their batteries, only to find themselves under fire from ships that seemed to materialize out of nowhere. The psychological trauma of these ghost attacks spread throughout the German submarine fleet. British naval tactics evolved to take full advantage of this new capability. Pink-painted ships would deliberately position themselves in areas where they should have been easily visible, acting as bait to draw German submarines into carefully prepared traps. When U-boats moved to attack what they thought were unescorted merchant vessels, they would suddenly find themselves surrounded by invisible escorts that had been there all along. The impact on German morale was devastating. U-boat crews began to speak of phantom ships and ghost convoys. Some submarines returned to port with reports of successful attacks on British vessels, only to have those same ships spotted intact in other locations days later. The line between reality and hallucination began to blur for crews operating under extreme stress in an environment where their most basic assumptions about visibility and detection had been shattered. The scientific principles behind Mountbatten pink were far more complex than they initially appeared. The effectiveness of the camouflage depended on a precise understanding of atmospheric optics, human visual perception, and the specific conditions present in the North Atlantic during wartime. Light scattering in the atmosphere follows what's known as Rayleigh scattering, where shorter wavelengths are scattered more than longer ones. During dawn and dusk, when the sun is low on the horizon, light has to travel through more atmosphere to reach the observer. This means that blue and violet light gets scattered away, while red and pink light continues relatively unimpeded. A ship painted in the right shade of pink would blend perfectly with this scattered light, becoming effectively invisible to observers at sea level. But the human eye's response to this phenomenon was equally important. Under low light conditions, human vision shifts from photopic color vision to scotopic black and white vision. During this transition, the eye becomes less sensitive to color differences and more sensitive to contrast. A pink ship against a pink sky creates minimal contrast, making it nearly impossible for the human eye to distinguish the ship from the background. The angle of observation was crucial. From a submarine periscope, which sits only a few feet above sea level, the viewing angle to the horizon is extremely shallow. This means that ships are always silhouetted against the sky, not against the ocean. Traditional naval camouflage, designed to blend with the sea, was completely ineffective from this perspective. Pink camouflage, designed to blend with the sky, was devastatingly effective. As the pink camouflage program proved its effectiveness, British naval researchers began developing increasingly sophisticated variations. Different shades were created for different seasons, latitudes, and weather conditions. Arctic pink was developed for operations in northern waters, where the light had different characteristics. Tropical rose was created for operations in warmer climates, where atmospheric conditions varied significantly. The program also expanded to include other colors based on similar scientific principles. Mountbatten blue was developed for night operations, designed to blend with the deep blue of the night sky. Dawn gray was created for ships operating primarily during early morning hours. Each color was precisely calibrated, using the latest understanding of atmospheric optics and human vision. British aircraft also began experimenting with similar camouflage schemes. RAF fighters painted in pale pink proved remarkably difficult for German pilots to spot against dawn and dusk skies. The psychological impact of being attacked by invisible aircraft was similar to what German submarine crews experienced with the pink ships. As World War II drew to a close, the pink camouflage program faced an unexpected enemy: peace itself. With the German U-boat threat eliminated, the Royal Navy began the process of returning to peacetime operations, and peacetime operations, it was decided, required ships that looked like proper warships, not floating cotton candy. The transition away from pink camouflage happened remarkably quickly. Within months of the war's end, nearly every pink-painted ship in the Royal Navy had been repainted in traditional grey. The specialized paint formulas were classified and locked away. The research data was buried in secret files. The men who had served aboard these vessels were quietly discouraged from discussing their experiences, but there was more to this erasure than simple peacetime protocol. The Royal Navy was facing a crisis of identity and purpose in the post-war world. Britain's global empire was crumbling, its economy was devastated, and its military was being rapidly downsized. The last thing naval leadership wanted was for their service to be remembered for painting ships pink, no matter how effective it had been. So, why don't we know this story? Why isn't Mountbatten pink taught in every military academy as a masterpiece of tactical innovation? Why has one of the most effective naval camouflage systems in history been almost completely forgotten? The answer lies in the complex intersection of military secrecy, cultural embarrassment, and the way we construct historical narratives. During the war, the pink camouflage program was classified at the highest levels of secrecy. The fewer people who knew about it, the longer it would remain effective against enemy forces. This culture of secrecy was so ingrained that it continued long after the war ended, even when there was no longer any tactical reason to keep the information hidden. But there was another, more uncomfortable reason for the cover-up: institutional embarrassment. Military historians and naval officers were deeply uncomfortable with the idea that one of the war's most effective innovations involved painting warships pink. It didn't fit the narrative of masculine, aggressive military might that dominated post-war military culture. It suggested that warfare could be won through cleverness and scientific understanding, rather than through brute force and traditional military virtues. The story was systematically erased from official histories. Technical reports that mentioned the pink camouflage program were classified and buried. Veterans who tried to discuss their experiences were told that their stories were still classified, even decades after the war ended. The myth that replaced the truth was simpler and more comfortable: that the Royal Navy won the Battle of the Atlantic through superior firepower, better training, traditional British naval excellence, and the eventual deployment of advanced radar and sonar systems. The real lesson of Mountbatten pink extends far beyond naval warfare or military history. It's a story about the danger of assumptions and the power of thinking beyond conventional wisdom. The German Navy lost ships, submarines, and lives because they couldn't imagine that their enemies would do something so seemingly undignified, so contrary to military tradition. This wasn't a failure of intelligence or technology, it was a failure of imagination. German naval officers were so locked into their preconceptions about what military camouflage should look like that they literally couldn't see the evidence in front of their eyes. They had created a mental model of warfare that excluded the possibility of pink warships, and that mental model blinded them to reality. The same psychological trap affects us in countless areas of life. We create assumptions about what success looks like, what innovation should resemble, what solutions are appropriate for specific problems. These assumptions become invisible barriers that prevent us from seeing opportunities and solutions that are right in front of us. Military effectiveness, as Mountbatten proved, isn't about looking intimidating or following tradition. It's about solving problems, even when the solution makes you look foolish to people who don't understand the science behind it. The most effective innovations are often the ones that seem completely absurd until you understand the principles that make them work. Today, Modern naval camouflage systems use sophisticated computer modeling and advanced materials science, but they're still based on the same fundamental principles that Mountbatten discovered in 1940. The idea of using color and pattern to exploit the limitations of human vision has become standard practice in military camouflage design. But we've lost something important in our modern, high-tech approach to warfare. We've forgotten that some of the most effective solutions come from individual creativity and willingness to challenge conventional wisdom. Mountbatten Pink worked not because it was high-tech or expensive, but because one person was willing to think differently about an old problem. The pink ships of World War II represent something that's increasingly rare in our modern world: the courage to look foolish in pursuit of effectiveness. In an age of focus groups, committee decisions, and risk-averse institutional thinking, it's almost impossible to imagine a modern military leader proposing to paint warships pink, no matter how sound the scientific reasoning behind it. Today, as you watch the sun set and see the sky painted in those same soft rose hues that once made British warships invisible to their enemies, remember that this beautiful color was once a weapon of war. Remember that some of the most effective solutions are the ones that seem completely absurd until you understand the science behind them. Remember that in warfare, as in life, the most dangerous enemy isn't bullets or torpedoes or enemy submarines. It's your own assumptions about what's possible. The German Navy lost the Battle of the Atlantic not because they lacked courage or skill or technology, but because they couldn't imagine that their enemies would paint their ships pink. And remember that somewhere in the North Atlantic, rusting on the ocean floor, lie the remains of German U-boats that were sunk by ships they never saw coming. Ships that were hiding in plain sight, painted the color of dawn, invisible not because they were hidden, but because they dared to be different. The next time someone tells you an idea is too crazy to work, think about Lord Louis Mountbatten walking into that meeting room in 1940 and suggesting that the Royal Navy paint their warships pink. Think about HMS Penelope sailing into battle, looking like a floating nursery and emerging victorious time after time. Think about the thousands of Allied sailors who came home safely because someone had the courage to challenge everything the military establishment thought they knew about camouflage. The most powerful weapon in any conflict isn't technology or firepower. It's the willingness to think beyond the boundaries of conventional wisdom. And sometimes, that thinking leads you to paint your warships pink and watch your enemies sail right past them, blind to the threat that's hiding in the color of the morning sky. Stories like Mountbatten Pink remind us that history is absolutely overflowing with incredible innovations that have been forgotten, deliberately hidden, or systematically erased from the official record. There are countless examples of brilliant solutions that seemed ridiculous at the time, but changed the course of human events, from ancient military tactics that used deception and psychology to defeat superior forces, to modern scientific breakthroughs that challenged everything we thought we knew about the natural world. The truth is, the most fascinating stories are often the ones that never made it into the textbooks, the ones that challenge our assumptions about how the world works and force us to question everything we think we know about history, science, and human nature. These are the stories that reveal the gap between what actually happened and what we've been told happened, between the messy reality of innovation and the sanitized version that gets passed down through official channels. That's exactly what we do here on this channel. We dig deep into history's most surprising moments, uncover the truth behind the myths, and reveal the incredible stories that have been hiding in plain sight. If you're fascinated by stories that turn conventional wisdom upside down, if you want to discover more hidden gems from history that will make you question everything you thought you knew, then make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. Trust me, you absolutely won't want to miss what we uncover next. We're going to explore more forgotten innovations, more buried secrets, more stories of ordinary people who changed the world by daring to think differently. The truth is always stranger than fiction, and history is full of pink warships waiting to be discovered by anyone brave enough to look beyond the official story.